Sarah Jenkins stood at the nurses' station of Atlanta Memorial Hospital, checking her patient charts for the third time that morning. The rehabilitation ward was unusually quiet for a Monday, and the gentle hum of medical equipment filled the air. Her dark skin glowed under the fluorescent lights as she tucked a stray braid behind her ear, something she always did when focusing on her work. At 32 years old, Sarah had established herself as one of the most dedicated nurses in the hospital. Her colleagues often joked that she was married to her job, and in many ways, they were right. After watching her mother struggle as a single parent, Sarah had promised herself she would build a stable career before thinking about romance. The quiet morning suddenly changed when the ward doors burst open. The paramedics wheeled in a new patient, and Dr. Thompson's voice echoed through the corridor. 35-year-old male, spinal cord injury from a rock climbing accident, transferred from intensive care for rehabilitation. Sarah rushed to help, her shoes squeaking against the freshly waxed floor. As she approached the new patient's bed, she met the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. The man's face was tired and pale, but there was something about his gentle smile that made her pause for a moment. "I'm James Crawford," he said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his condition. "I guess this is home for a while." Sarah found herself smiling back. "Welcome to the rehabilitation ward, Mr. Crawford. I'm Sarah Jenkins, and I'll be one of your primary nurses during your stay." Over the next few hours, Sarah learned more about James. He was a software engineer who loved outdoor adventures. The accident had happened during a solo climbing trip when his safety equipment had malfunctioned. The doctors had told him he might never walk again, but there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't ready to accept that verdict. "You know," James said while Sarah was checking his vital signs, "everyone's been walking on eggshells around me since the accident. You're the first person who's just treated me like a normal human being." Sarah adjusted his pillows with practiced ease. "That's because you are a normal human being, Mr. Crawford. The wheelchair doesn't change who you are." "Please call me James," he said, catching her hand as she finished. "Mr. Crawford makes me sound like my father." The touch sent an unexpected shiver through Sarah's arm, and she quickly busied herself with his chart. She had strict rules about maintaining professional boundaries with patients, but something about James made her want to know more about him. Throughout the day, Sarah found herself making extra stops at James's room. She told herself it was because he was a new patient who needed close monitoring, but deep down, she knew there was more to it. They talked about their families between his medical checks, his overprotective mother, her hardworking single mom, his younger sister who was studying abroad. By the end of her shift, Sarah realized she had spent more time talking to James than any patient she ever had. He had a way of making conversation flow naturally, even when discussing difficult topics like his accident or the challenges ahead. As she was preparing to leave, James called out to her, "Sarah, thank you for today, for making this place feel less like a hospital and more like, well, somewhere I can actually get better." Sarah smiled, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "That's what we're here for, James. Get some rest, and I'll see you tomorrow." Walking to her car that evening, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened that day. She had met hundreds of patients over her 8-year nursing career, but none had left such an immediate impression on her. At home, as she prepared her dinner for one, Sarah found herself thinking about James's smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and how he spoke about his future with determination despite his current situation. She had to remind herself firmly that he was her patient, and any feelings beyond professional care were strictly off limits. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Monday would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would challenge her professional boundaries, defy societal expectations, and ultimately change her life forever. As she drifted off to sleep that night, James' blue eyes and gentle smile followed her into her dreams, hinting at the remarkable story that was about to unfold. 2 weeks passed quickly in the rehabilitation ward. Sarah found herself looking forward to her shifts more than ever, especially when they involved caring for James. His determination during physical therapy sessions impressed everyone, even the most experienced therapists. Despite the pain and frustration, he never lost his smile or his ability to make others laugh. One morning, while Sarah was helping James with his exercises, an elegant woman in expensive clothes walked into the room. Her perfectly styled gray hair and sharp features left no doubt that this was James's mother, Catherine Crawford. "James, darling," Catherine said, her eyes quickly moving from her son to Sarah's hands on James's arm. I didn't know you were having therapy this early. Sarah stepped back professionally, but James reached for her hand. Mom, this is Sarah Jenkins, the nurse I've been telling you about. Sarah, this is my mother, Catherine Crawford. Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. How? Nice to meet you. James has mentioned you're very helpful with his care. Her tone suggested she thought Sarah was being a little too helpful. After Catherine's visit, Sarah noticed a change in the atmosphere. More members of the Crawford family started showing up regularly, aunts, uncles, and family friends. They were always polite, but their smiles were cold, and they'd often spoke about the right kind of people while glancing in Sarah's direction. Despite this, James seemed to grow even closer to Sarah. During their therapy sessions, he shared stories about his childhood, his dreams, and his fears about the future. Sarah found herself sharing too, about growing up with her mother in a small apartment, working through nursing school, and her own hopes and dreams. One evening, after most of the staff had left, James asked Sarah to stay a few minutes after her shift. I need to tell you something, he said, his blue eyes serious. My mother's been trying to arrange for me to transfer to a private facility closer to their home. Sarah's heart sank, but she kept her professional smile. That might be good for you, being closer to family. No, James said firmly. I don't want to go, not just because of the quality of care here, but because of you, Sarah. Sarah sat down in the chair next to his wheelchair, her hands trembling slightly. James, I'm just your nurse. We both know that's not true anymore, he said softly. These past weeks, you've been my sunshine. When I'm with you, I don't feel like a patient. I feel like a man who's falling in love. Sarah's eyes widened. James, we can't. I mean, there are rules about nurses dating patients. Then I'll request a different nurse, he said quickly. Sarah, I don't care what my family thinks about us being different races. I don't care what anyone thinks about me being in this wheelchair. When I'm with you, none of that matters. Before Sarah could respond, her friend and fellow nurse, Lisa, burst into the room. Sarah, girl, you won't believe what I just heard. The Crawford family is trying to file a complaint about you being too unprofessional with their son. Sarah felt like the floor was dropping beneath her feet, but James's voice cut through her panic. Good, he said firmly. Now I have a reason to request a different nurse, and then I can properly ask Sarah out on a date. Lisa's mouth fell open, and Sarah couldn't help but laugh despite her anxiety. James Crawford, you are impossible. Impossibly in love with you, he replied with a grin. So, what do you say? Once we sort out all this professional boundary stuff, will you go out with me? Sarah looked at his hopeful face, then at Lisa's encouraging smile, and finally thought about all the disapproving Crawford family members. She thought about her mother's words. Life is too short to let other people's prejudices stand in the way of your happiness. Yes, she said finally, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. Yes, I will. The joy on James's face made all the upcoming challenges seem worthwhile. As Sarah left the hospital that night, she knew things wouldn't be easy. They would face prejudice from both sides about their racial differences and about James's disability. But something in her heart told her this was right. What she didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of their journey, and the biggest surprises were yet to come. A year had passed since Sarah and James's first date at the hospital cafe. After James was discharged, they started seeing each other regularly, turning their hospital romance into something deeper and more meaningful. James had made remarkable progress in his physical therapy, and though he still relied on his wheelchair, his upper body strength had improved significantly. On a warm Saturday evening, Sarah drove them to the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. James had been mysteriously quiet during the ride, but Sarah assumed he was tired from his therapy session earlier that day. The gardens were beautiful at sunset, with fairy lights starting to twinkle in the trees. Remember when I told you about this place during my hospital stay? James asked as they followed the wheelchair-accessible path. How I used to come here to think when I needed to solve difficult programming problems. Sarah pushed his wheelchair gently, enjoying the sweet scent of flowers in the air. Yes, and you promised to show me your favorite spot someday. They reached a beautiful gazebo overlooking a pond filled with water lilies. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the water's surface. A few other visitors were around, some giving curious glances at the interracial couple, but Sarah and James had learned to ignore such looks months ago. "This is it," James said, taking control of his wheelchair and turning to face Sarah. "This is where I used to make all my big life decisions." He reached for her hand, his palms slightly sweaty. "And now, I'm making the biggest decision of my life right here." Sarah's heart began to race as James pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring that caught the last rays of sunlight. "Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice full of emotion, "this past year has been the most challenging and the most beautiful of my life. You saw me at my lowest point in the hospital, and instead of pity, you showed me respect and kindness. You looked past my wheelchair and saw the man inside. You stood by me despite my family's initial disapproval and society's judgmental stares." Tears began forming in Sarah's eyes as James continued. "You taught me that love doesn't see color or disability. It sees the heart. Every morning when I wake up, my first thought is of you, and every night when I go to sleep, my last prayer is of gratitude for having you in my life." A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. Sarah could hear some people sniffling and others whispering encouragingly. "I may not be able to get down on one knee," James said with a small laugh, "but I can promise you my heart, my soul, and my unwavering love for the rest of our lives. Sarah Jenkins, will you marry me?" Sarah's tears were flowing freely now. She knelt down beside his wheelchair, not caring about the dirt on her dress or the people watching. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, James Crawford, I will marry you." The garden erupted in applause as James slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Someone started playing soft music on their phone, and the garden staff, who had been quietly watching, turned on additional lights in the gazebo, creating a magical atmosphere. To everyone's surprise, Catherine Crawford stepped out from behind a nearby tree. She had been there the whole time, watching the proposal. With tears in her eyes, she walked up to the newly engaged couple. "I was wrong," she said softly, reaching for both their hands. "Seeing you together, seeing how you love each other. I was so wrong. Welcome to the family, Sarah." As the sun set completely and the garden lights twinkled around them, Sarah, James, and Catherine shared a moment of healing and joy. Other visitors offered their congratulations, and several people took photos of the happy couple. That evening marked not just an engagement, but a victory of love over prejudice, of hope over fear, and of acceptance over judgment. As they left the garden, Sarah and James knew their journey together was just beginning, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, hand in hand, heart in heart. Planning a wedding was more challenging than Sarah and James had imagined. Every weekend, they visited different venues, only to find many of them lacking proper wheelchair accessibility. Sarah kept a notebook filled with lists and sketches, determined to create a perfect day that would accommodate everyone's needs. Catherine Crawford, trying to make up for her past behavior, threw herself into the wedding preparations. One Sunday morning, she arrived at Sarah and James' apartment with a stack of bridal magazines and a determined look on her face. "I found the perfect venue," Catherine announced, spreading photos across their dining table. "The Mason Gardens Hotel. They have beautiful ramps integrated into their garden design, elevator access to all floors, and wide doorways everywhere." She paused, looking nervously at Sarah. "And they'd never hosted an interracial wedding before, but the manager assured me they would be honored to be the first." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Just 6 months ago, Catherine had been against their relationship, and now here she was, fighting to make their wedding day perfect. James reached over and squeezed his mother's hand, his own eyes glistening. The next challenge came with the wedding traditions. Sarah's mother, Diana, wanted to incorporate African American wedding customs, while the Crawfords had their own family traditions. Instead of this becoming a source of conflict, the two families worked together to create something unique. "We'll jump the broom," Diana suggested during a family dinner, "but we'll attach it to James's wheelchair so he can be part of the tradition too." The idea brought smiles to everyone's faces, especially James's. The guest list proved to be another interesting challenge. Some of the Crawford family members still refused to attend, sending cold regret cards with flimsy excuses. But for every person who declined, it seemed two more eagerly accepted, including many of Sarah and James's friends from the hospital. One evening, while they were addressing invitations, James grew quiet. Sarah noticed his thoughtful expression and asked what was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," he said, smiling softly. "I was just thinking about Dr. Thompson and the rehab team. They're not just our guests, they're the reason we met. Without my accident, I might never have found you." Sarah put down her pen and moved to sit beside him. "Life has strange ways of bringing people together," she said, taking his hand. "But I believe we would have found each other somehow, somewhere." The wedding dress shopping brought its own set of emotions. Sarah went with both her mother and Catherine, an outing that could have been awkward, but turned out to be full of laughter and happy tears. They found a beautiful dress that would look perfect whether Sarah was standing or kneeling beside James's wheelchair for photos. James had his own surprise in preparation, though Sarah didn't know it yet. During his regular physical therapy sessions, he had been working on something special, pushing himself harder than ever. His therapist, Mike, had become not just his trainer, but his confidant in this secret mission. 1 month before the wedding, Catherine hosted an engagement party at her home. As Sarah looked around the room at their families mingling together, her cousins chatting with James's aunts, her mother teaching Catherine how to make her famous sweet potato pie, she felt overwhelmed with joy. "Penny for your thoughts?" James asked, wheeling up beside her. "I was just thinking how far we've come," Sarah replied. "Remember when your mother could barely look at me? Now she's in the kitchen getting cooking lessons from my mom." James pulled her down for a kiss. "Love changes everything, Sarah. It changed me, it changed my family, and it's going to change our future." What Sarah didn't know was just how right he was. As their wedding day approached, James continued his secret preparation, determined to give his bride a moment she would never forget. The biggest surprise was still to come, one that would make their wedding day even more memorable than anyone could imagine. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. Sunny skies and a gentle breeze that made the flowers in Mason Gardens Hotel dance. Sarah sat in the bridal suite, watching her mother and Catherine work together to arrange her veil. The two women had become close friends over the past months, proving that love could indeed break down any barrier. "Something old," Diana said, pinning her grandmother's pearl brooch to Sarah's dress. "Your grandmother would have been so proud to see you today." "Something new," Catherine added, fastening a diamond necklace around Sarah's neck. "Welcome to the family, my dear daughter." Sarah's best friend Lisa, who had witnessed their love story from the beginning at the hospital, wiped away tears as she helped with the final touches. "Girl, you look like a queen. James is going to cry when he sees you." In another room, James was getting ready with help from his best man, Mike, his physical therapist turned close friend. They had been practicing something special for weeks, and James felt both nervous and excited about the surprise he had planned for later. "You sure you want to wait for the photo session?" Mike asked quietly while helping James with his bow tie. "You could surprise her during the ceremony." James shook his head. "The photo will capture it forever. Just make sure everything's ready when the time comes." The ceremony space looked magical. The hotel's garden had been transformed with white flowers and soft fabric draped between trees. The aisle was wide and smooth, perfect for James's wheelchair. Guests filled both sides, and Sarah's heart warmed seeing how the seating had naturally mixed. There was no bride's side or groom's side, just family and friends sitting together. When the music started, James positioned himself at the altar, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. His eyes filled with tears as Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle. She was breathtaking in her white dress, which flowed around her like a cloud. Her dark skin glowed with happiness, and her smile lit up the entire garden. Diana walked beside her daughter, proud and tall. When they reached the altar, she kissed Sarah's cheek, and then leaned down to kiss James's cheek too, a gesture that made several guests stab at their eyes. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of both families' traditions. The minister spoke about love transcending all boundaries, physical, racial, and social. When it was time for the vows, James went first, his voice strong and clear. "Sarah Jenkins, you saw me at my lowest and helped me find my strength. You taught me that love doesn't see limitations, only possibilities. I promise to spend every day of my life showing you the same unconditional love you've shown me." Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke her vows. "James Crawford, you came into my life unexpectedly and showed me what real love looks like. Your strength inspires me, your kindness moves me, and your love completes me. I promise to be by your side through every challenge and every triumph." The ring exchange was especially touching. James had practiced for weeks to ensure he could place the ring on Sarah's finger smoothly, despite his occasional hand tremors. When he succeeded, the pride in his eyes matched the joy in Sarah's. The minister then presented a beautifully decorated broom, which had been carefully attached to James's wheelchair. Together, they rolled over it, creating their own unique version of the traditional African-American wedding custom of jumping the broom. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister announced. "You may kiss the bride." Sarah knelt gracefully beside James's wheelchair, and their kiss was met with cheers, applause, and more than a few happy tears. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, both families stood together, clapping and celebrating. Little did anyone know that the most magical moment was yet to come. As they prepared to move to the photography session, James caught Mike's eye and gave a subtle nod. Everything was ready for the surprise that would make this day even more unforgettable. After the ceremony, the wedding photographer, Marcus, gathered everyone in the hotel's grand garden for family photos. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene, creating perfect lighting conditions. Sarah stood radiant in her white dress, while James sat proudly in his wheelchair, both of them still floating on the joy of their recent vows. "Let's start with the immediate family," Marcus called out, positioning Diana and Catherine on either side of the newlyweds. He took several shots, then began arranging different combinations of family members. Throughout it all, James kept glancing at Mike, who stood quietly at the edge of the group, holding a large equipment bag. "Now," Marcus said, looking through his viewfinder, "I'd like to try something different for the couple's portrait. Sarah, could you stand beside James's wheelchair?" Sarah moved into position, but before Marcus could continue, James spoke up. "Actually, I have a different idea." His voice trembled slightly with excitement and nervousness. "Mike, is everything ready?" Mike stepped forward with the bag, and a hushed anticipation fell over the gathering. Sarah looked confused as Mike and James's father, Robert, approached the wheelchair. "James, what's going on?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. "Sarah, my love," James said, taking her hand, "I've been keeping a secret from you." He nodded to Mike, who began pulling something from the bag, a specially designed mobility assistance device. "For the past 6 months, I've been working with Mike on a surprise for our wedding day." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Mike and Robert carefully attached the device to James's legs and torso. It was a state-of-the-art mobility aid designed to provide support while allowing him to stand. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was about to happen. "The doctors said I might never stand again," James continued, his voice thick with emotion, "but they didn't count on having such an amazing reason to try." He looked up at Sarah, whose eyes were filling with tears. "I wanted to stand beside my bride, even if just for one photo." Mike positioned himself on one side of James while Robert took the other. With their support, James gripped the handles of the device. The garden fell completely silent. Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Slowly, steadily, James began to push himself up. His arms trembled with effort, and sweat beaded on his forehead, but his determination never wavered. Inch by inch, he rose from his wheelchair. The mobility device supported his weight while allowing him to maintain his balance. Sarah couldn't hold back her tears as James reached his full height. He stood tall beside her, a feat that doctors had once said would be impossible. The gathering burst into applause and cheers. Catherine sobbed openly while Diana hugged her, both women overcome with emotion. "Surprise, my love," James whispered, his own eyes glistening with tears. He was slightly unsteady, but the joy in his face overshadowed any physical strain. "I wanted to give you a wedding photo where I'm standing beside you, just like I'll stand beside you through everything life throws our way." Marcus, who had been quietly capturing every moment of this incredible scene, raised his camera. "This is perfect," he said, his own voice choked with emotion. "Now, give me that beautiful smile, both of you." Sarah turned to face her husband, her heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. James stood proud and tall beside her, defying all odds through sheer determination and love. As they posed for the photo, their families surrounding them with tears and smiles, Sarah realized that this moment was more than just a wedding picture. It was a symbol of their love's power to overcome any obstacle. The golden sunlight wrapped around them like a blessing as Marcus's camera clicked, immortalizing the moment forever. A moment that would soon become more than just a family memory, but an inspiration to thousands of others who would hear their story. The next hour after James's surprise became a blur of emotions and revelations. As James carefully lowered himself back into his wheelchair with Mike and Robert's help, Sarah knelt beside him, still trying to process what had just happened. The garden buzzed with excited chatter as guests wiped away tears and hugged each other. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah asked, holding James's hands in hers. She could feel them trembling slightly from the exertion of standing. James smiled, catching his breath. "Remember all those extra therapy sessions I said were for building upper body strength? Well, that wasn't the whole truth." He gestured to Mike, who stepped forward with a folder full of photos and progress reports. "We've been working on this for 6 months," Mike explained, showing Sarah the documentation of James's journey. 3 times a week, sometimes more. James never gave up, even when it seemed impossible. He was determined to stand beside you today. The photos showed James's progression, from his first attempts with parallel bars, through countless falls and setbacks, to finally managing to stand with the support device. Sarah's heart swelled as she saw the determination in his face in every picture, knowing now that she had been his motivation all along. Catherine approached them, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I knew about the practice sessions," she admitted. "That's why I insisted on this venue. They let James and Mike use their gym facilities after hours to practice walking down this very garden path. Mom helped arrange everything," James added, squeezing his mother's hand. She made sure the venue staff kept it secret and helped coordinate with the device manufacturers to get it here and properly fitted. Lisa, who had been filming everything on her phone, showed them the video she'd captured of the moment. "This is going viral already," she said excitedly. "I posted it with your permission, James, and it's getting thousands of shares. People are calling it the ultimate wedding surprise." Sarah watched the video, tears flowing freely as she saw herself reacting to James standing up. The raw emotion on everyone's faces, the determination in James's eyes, the pure joy of the moment. It was all there, captured forever. Dr. Thompson, who had been invited as a special guest, stepped forward to explain the medical significance. "What James has accomplished is remarkable," he said, his voice filled with professional pride. "While he still needs the wheelchair for daily mobility, his dedication to physical therapy has opened up new possibilities we didn't think possible after his accident." Marcus, the photographer, showed them some of the photos he'd just taken on his camera's display screen. The images were stunning. James rising from his wheelchair, Sarah's look of absolute surprise, their first moment standing together as husband and wife, both of their faces glowing with joy and love. "These aren't just wedding photos," Marcus said softly. "These are testament to the power of love and determination. They tell a story that needs to be shared." Diana hugged her new son-in-law, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown us all what true love looks like, James. It's not about what you can or cannot do. It's about what you're willing to do for the one you love." As the excitement began to settle, the wedding planner gently reminded everyone that the reception was about to begin. James looked tired but happier than Sarah had ever seen him. She knew the standing had taken a lot out of him, but his eyes sparkled with joy and achievement. Was it worth all the secrecy and hard work? Sarah asked, bending down to kiss him. James pulled her close, his voice full of emotion. Seeing your face in that moment made every second of practice, every muscle ache, every frustration worth it. This was just the beginning, Sarah. We have a lifetime of surprises ahead of us. Little did they know that their story was already spreading across social media, touching hearts and inspiring people around the world. The simple family wedding photo was about to become a symbol of hope and true love for countless others. 1 month after their wedding, Sarah and James sat in their living room, still amazed by how their story had touched millions of lives. The wedding photo of James, standing beside Sarah, had gone viral, reaching far beyond their wildest expectations. Their inbox was flooded with messages from people around the world who found hope in their love story. "Look at this one," Sarah said, reading from her laptop. It's from a young woman in Chicago. She writes, "Your story made me believe in love again. I've been afraid to date since my accident left me in a wheelchair, but seeing your wedding photos showed me that true love sees beyond physical limitations. James wheeled closer to read over her shoulder. Though he used his wheelchair most of the time, he continued his therapy sessions and could now stand for short periods during special occasions. The mobility device stayed in their closet, a reminder that determination could make the impossible possible. Here's another one, James said, scrolling through his phone. A mother whose son is dating across racial lines. She says our story helped her understand that love is more important than old prejudices. She's finally invited her son's girlfriend to family dinner. Their story had been featured in several news outlets, and they'd even been invited to appear on a popular morning show. But what meant the most to them were the quiet changes they saw in their own families and community. Catherine Crawford had become a vocal advocate for disability rights, using her social connections to raise funds for accessible facilities in their city. She and Diana had started a support group for parents adapting to interracial marriages in their families, turning their own journey of acceptance into help for others. At the hospital where they first met, Sarah continued her nursing work, but now she also spoke at rehabilitation sessions, sharing their story with patients struggling to find hope after accidents or injuries. James often joined her, demonstrating his standing technique and showing that with love and support, recovery could exceed medical expectations. "Remember what Dr. Thompson said at our wedding?" Sarah asked, closing her laptop. "About how our story would inspire others. I don't think even he imagined how far it would reach." James smiled, taking her hand. "The best part is that it's still just beginning. Every day with you is a new adventure, a new chance to show the world what love can do." Their home had become a testament to their journey. The viral wedding photo hung proudly in their living room, alongside pictures of their families together at holidays and celebrations. The walls told the story of two families becoming one, of love breaking down barriers that once seemed insurmountable. Lisa, who had first captured the standing moment on her phone, had turned their story into a documentary for her film school thesis. The short film, titled Standing for Love, had won several student film festival awards and was being used in diversity training programs. "You know what makes me happiest?" Sarah said, moving to sit on the couch beside James's wheelchair. "It's not the viral fame or the inspiring messages. It's seeing how our love changed not just us, but everyone around us. Your mother and mine are best friends now. Who would have thought?" James reached up to touch her face gently. "Love is like that ripple in a pond. It starts with two people, but it spreads out, touching everything around it. Our story might be famous, but it's really just one example of what happens when people choose love over fear, hope over doubt." As they sat together in their home, surrounded by memories of their journey and messages from lives they touched, Sarah and James knew they had created something bigger than themselves. Their love story had become a beacon of hope, showing the world that true love knows no boundaries, not race, not disability, not society's expectations. The viral wedding photo captured more than just a moment of triumph. It captured the truth that with love, anything is possible. And for Sarah and James Crawford, this was just the beginning of their lifetime of proving that love, in all its forms, could change the world, one heart at a time.